to concentrate just a bit more on the sort of downgrade, what the rating agencies mean, how you've got to view it if you've got a business. I'm going to obviously give you an intro into the world economy and the reason why I think the South African economy might not be as badly affected as others if they get a downgrade. So that's maybe the sort of long and the short of it. So let's start with the international environment. The fact of the matter is that the emerging markets that aren't producing commodities have been doing relatively well for a long time. And today we find that India is starting to outpace China, but from a much lower base. And China's growth is also changing because if you've got a one-child policy, you age very, very quickly. And as people get older, let me tell you, you're more likely to go to the doctor than the mechanic. Okay, and you're even more likely to go to the mechanic than the new car salesman because you're quite happy living with your older car. So you're not going to use quite as many commodities, whereas India is going to probably be the new China, but it's probably still a decade or two away from really making its mark in the commodity field because we're talking people that are much poorer. The average person in China per capita income has surpassed that of South Africans at the moment. The average person in China is a lot richer than we are, and they've taken a lot of people out of abject poverty, and in India the same thing is happening. The developed countries just don't grow quite as fast, but the disappointment here is probably Germany, Japan, and France, and most of Europe, because with the lower oil prices and commodity prices, you would expect those countries to have performed a lot better. The UK and the United States are doing okay for where they are because both of them are also oil producers. At the other end of the scale, Brazil has had 3 years of decline. They've seen a shrinking economy. You think our politics is bad, it looks like their second president in a row will be impeached now. Russia really relies a lot on oil. It also had a big fall in its GDP. It's starting to come out of it now. Brazil will probably also be positive this year, but nonetheless they've had the worst recession in 104 years since they started keeping records. So the commodity producers around the world, with the big fall of commodity prices, have had a hard time. But here's the interesting thing, is that for about 5 years or so, most international agencies have been downgrading the world's growth as we got closer to the actual year that we were in. So when we were in 2014, they all said, no, 2016 is going to be a great growth year. And the closer we got to it, the more that growth was downgraded. This is the first year where we're starting to see them upgrade the growth, be it just with 0.1%, but the fact is there's not another slowdown foreseen, and then as we go later in the year, it slows down. We're actually seeing forecasts move upwards. And that says to me that the world economy around us is a very positive influence on South Africa at the moment. We don't realize it every day, but if the world doesn't grow, our commodities don't sell. And if the world doesn't grow, it's very difficult for us, a country that's in the commodity game largely, not maybe as much as a Russia and a Brazil, but we will have a bit of a problem. So it's actually a very good thing. You can see here some of the forecasts, but just one thing on the world. It's really been a very, very interesting world in the sense that in the last sort of 25, 30 years, 2 billion people have come out of poverty. We now have about 1.6 billion people still in poverty, but that's out of about 7.5 billion people. So it is now a minority of people that are in poverty. The rich and the middle class is about $10 a day in purchase power parity, then you're in the middle class. That's what they say. And if you think of that, purchase power parity is about $6 rand to a dollar, that means 60 rand a person a day. So those are the places where the world has grown, and a lot of people have gone into, let's call it, the lower middle class, the upper middle class, and the rich. But what we forgot about, and that's the thing, that those people that got rich were in South Africa, or they were in China, or they were in India, or wherever they were. And the guy in America with an MBA from Harvard University, what do you say to him? Can I have that with chips, please? Because as Bob Dylan already forecast in the 1960s, after 20 years of schooling, they'll put you on the day shift. You know, and if you want to know in an academic setting, if you haven't got a doctor's degree and 50 years worth of experience, you can forget that professorship. No, seriously, these guys have to work very, very hard to get somewhere. But that's the top end where it's still lucky. The guy at the bottom that is working at the McDonald's, and obviously I'm joking about the Harvard MBA, but the guy that's working in the factory, he's under pressure. He's the guy that's competing against the Chinese guy. And if you go back 30 years, not 1 in 10 Chinese were richer than the bottom 10th of the Americans. Today, 30% of the Chinese are richer than the bottom 20% of Americans. So it's a very big shift. And those guys feel, well, my job has been taken. And whether it's in America or France or the UK, it's that me first world. What about me? And I think what the world failed to do is to tell people the benefits of free trade, that they have more choices, that their products are cheaper. But it's very difficult to tell that to a person who feels very insecure in his or her job. And it is a very, very different era for, let's say, the first world. They're starting to feel that pressure. Forget the refugees or everything. I think the populist uprising, whether it be from the left side in Greece or from the right in France, or the Donald Trump right through the door sort of type of person, we're looking at people that are dissatisfied. They're unhappy. They are feeling that pressure. So they don't feel that positive, whereas the emerging markets feel more positive. And I think that's the point. I think I've said most of this. So people want to become more protectionist. World trade is was at record highs, it's fallen back now. But we're starting to for the first time now again in a while, starting to see these are just containers, the number of containers going through 85 of the world's ports, that picking up. So it gives me hope for the short term. I'm not sure how policies are going to turn out in the long term. And there was a rejection of the me first world in France now, the same with Holland. And even Mr. Trump has said, well, okay, we'll allow the Iranians to carry on, we won't put the sanctions there. And he spoke horribly about Muslims or whatever the case may be, but yet his first visit is to Saudi Arabia. So, you know, things aren't always what they seem, I guess, in politics and neither in life. So we are seeing a bit of a tick up there. For South Africa, here was our big problem. That was our perfect storm, is that big fall in commodity prices. In US dollar terms, they dropped nearly 60%. They've come back with about 50% from that low. But, you know, that's still a long way to go. And it's unlikely it's going to surpass that previous record for quite some time, at least in US dollars. But luckily, the rand fell. What? Yeah, luckily, the rand fell. As with most other emerging market currencies, you can see here we're in third place. We're sometimes in second, sometimes in fourth. But Argentina, South Africa, Brazil, Russia, Mexico, all of those are big commodity exporters. And all of those saw big declines in their currencies. So is Indonesia with coal. India and Turkey are a bit different here, obviously. So that meant our commodity prices in rand terms didn't fall quite as much. Although obviously we have a higher inflation rate, so reaching that sort of high that we did before says to me that maybe it's not quite so positive in the mining, but we are seeing the mining come back, we are seeing agriculture come back. That's due to the drought ending, at least in the north. And yes, there has been a little bit of a downtick in our own commodity prices in rand terms recently. And that is a bit of a concern if it carries on too long. But in that whole thing, where the rest of the world, you can see, became richer, we also became richer as South Africans. And this is per capita income in US dollar terms, and it's on a purchase power parity. And you can see in the early 90s, we were just richer than the world average. We kept up till about 2008. Then the commodity cycle turned against us, our politics turned a bit against us, and the gap started widening. And if you look at it a different way and you say, as a percentage of the world average, you can see on the graph we were about 10% or so richer, and now we're about 15% or so poorer than the average in the world. So we didn't get poorer, but in relative terms, we did fall behind. So it's not absolute terms, it's relative terms. And that's where we are. And why am I saying this? Well, they asked me to talk about the downgrade. Now, the first thing that the rating agencies or anybody else is going to look at is your income. Because guess what? If you're a multi-billionaire and you lend money from the bank gives it to you. And they'll give you so much money, all right, that the bank manager sweats when the guy goes to the dentist. All right? Because may he not die. May he remember to pay me back. But if you're the poor person at the bottom of the pile who's taken out a microloan, the bank's not sweating about you. You're sweating about the bank. And it works simply. Poorer people have to spend more of their money on food. Poorer people have to spend more of their money on transport and the like. So if we compare that in countries, and now in relative terms we've fallen back, we haven't got as richer as the rest of the world, the rating agencies look at that, and that makes a big part. That's probably the base. Some of them it could be 20%, others it's 30, 40% that makes out of their ratings decision. And because we haven't been growing in the near term, we've been actually getting poorer as such, because our growth has been below our population growth. That is where this comes in. So I'm not saying we weren't going to get downgraded, but what I will say is then you add the politics to the mix, and you have a change of finance ministers. Unexpectedly, the guy's still out there selling us, and then the rug is pulled. That is going to inflict damage on you. And I'll tell you why that happens, because I'm going to go to the rating agencies now. Remember 2008, 2009, when the world had a crisis? We had housing loans. When students of UJ without an income got to buy 7 houses each, here in Morningside and Dainfern. You didn't know this. No, that was in the US actually. And the rating agencies, this thing was packaged so well that the rating agencies couldn't see through that packaging. And the problem was that a lot of these people that got home loans didn't have the income to finance those homes. But the salesman said, don't worry, your income will go up. It's fine. The income didn't go up that quickly, so it wasn't fine. And at the other end, the salesman for the bank would tell, here, pension fund in Sweden or in South Africa, here you are, this thing is as safe as houses. It's got collateral. It's beautiful. These people are making money. You cannot lose. And you lost. And what did happen? Well, American Congress and in Europe, everywhere, the rating agencies got pulled in, and they got washed over the head. And they said, look, you can't do this because you get paid by the issuer. So in our case, the government issues debt, and the government pays the rating agencies to give us a review. But the actual customer of the rating agency is who? Is our pension funds, or the world's pension funds, or mutual funds. Those are the big customers of the rating agencies. And why are they there? Because the trustees of those funds and others want to have something in place to be safer. So they'll have rules, and they'll say if the person or the country or the firm is AAA rated, you can put 10% of your money there. If it's sort of somewhere else in investment grade, maybe 8 or 5% or whatever. But if it's not investment grade, or what we confirm, or what we like to call junk status, then you can't put much money there. Some of them you can maybe put 1 or 2% still, others zilch. And the trustees will have different rules. And then the trustees can wash their hands. Because you know what the modern world is about. Huh? It's just not receiving blame. You cannot be guilty. You had rules in place. You had systems in place. You were ethical. You did everything right. So the rating agencies took a lot of the blame for the Great Recession worldwide. And they had to come up and say, well, we have to be harsher on these people. And now, when a country gets downgraded, we feel that impact. But we also have ourselves to blame because we weren't growing. And we're not creating certainty. All right? And the guy says, well, you have long strikes here. You're not growing very quickly. You're actually getting poorer. Oh, the rest of the world is doing much better than you are. So relative to the rest of the world, because that rating agency's got to explain that, because guess what happened? When Moody's didn't downgrade us recently, people complained in a place like Brazil and said, but you've downgraded us. You didn't downgrade those South Africans. They don't work. They only do strikes there, man. Their president is nearly as bad as our president. Okay? So those are the sort of things that we sit in. And that's how rating agencies work. And the rating agencies now have regulators that they've got to be answerable to. And they've got to say, this is our system, this is what we look at. So it's become a bit more open, and this is where we are, it's just in Afrikaans, but it shows you that Moody's is the only one that has got us two above investment grade, and it's very likely that they're going to drop us at least one. It's going to be a train smash if they drop us twice, and it will be half a train smash if they downgrade us once with a negative outlook, because that means in about 70% of the cases, within 2 years you get another downgrade. And that's something that we want to avoid, because if we get two rating agencies that take our debt and put it into the junk status, we're finding a lot of our money goes away. Now, I'll show you the money part now, but after the thing I'm just using, the Beeld, the Circle 24, there's 33 economists in there. You can see how many things changed here. The growth rates have been coming down in the forecast before, but if you just look at the recent one, it was quite a downgrade in forecasts. It's not the end of growth, but it means our growth is going to be much slower. Sorry, I think the actual forecasts on our government debt, well, it's now about 8.8%. Some corporates are delaying programs of issuing government debt. So what does that mean? Well, if you're MTN and you went to the market and you didn't get that money, maybe you're not going to put that many cell phone towers out there. So that's important if you're in the IT game and you need speed. Or that's important if you're the construction company that's putting together those towers, if you wish. So ultimately, Transnet had a problem, Barloworld had a problem, and I suspect we're going to see a lot more of those problems in the meantime. But it won't be 100% everything, but here's one thing that most of us didn't see, and that's the government debt. It was at one stage trading very close to 8.3% and went up all the way past 9%. Now, I need not tell you that it was busy coming down. You can see there, before the ratings downgrade came in, and things were looking up. People were talking. Our finance minister said there were green shoots. There's a lot of other people that were talking those green shoots. I can show you in the transport. I can show you in agriculture. I can show you in mining. They're not all going away overnight either. It's not the end of the world, but it does mean that it's going to be difficult and more difficult to continue with them. Because this week, for example, we're going to get an interest rate decision on the shorter term interest rates, or otherwise known as prime for us. And that prime rate, what does that mean? Well, it's the way most of us borrow, and it should have come down this week. Now it's unlikely to come down. And that means all of us are paying a few £100 more on our home loans, our car loans, our credit cards, and the like, our overdrafts, and we forget, and even student loans. So that is a very important thing. Interest rates are very important. So I think there's now a 70% chance of no decline. The consumer confidence. Did you see those car sales, how they dropped? Did you talk to the estate agents? All of a sudden people are not coming to show days of houses anymore. And that has an impact because now you don't build as many houses because the houses we're building now were planned months ago. So who does that influence? Well, you can think when you're building a house, you're going to use an architect, a surveyor. So those guys are a bit in trouble, not as much work. At the other end, what's also going to happen is that the furniture sales guys, you know, when you move to a new house, it's amazing. You all of a sudden find a need for a new bed, a new lounge suite, you know, and a new cover for the bike shed and whatever. But you have all these things. And what happened to car sales? They went down. But at the same time, it means that the guy in the maintenance game is going to get more people because cars are going to get older. So the mechanic is going to have more work. The electrician might not have the certificate sort of work anymore, but I'm assuming that as things get older in a house, you'll need the electrician more or the plumber more. And those are the sort of things. So it's not just a one straight game. And we don't know all these things. And in our cities, the guys are not going to get the money that they wanted before. And a business in a city like Joburg or people here will feel that as well. Business confidence. I think if you go and look at who went with on the roadshow with the previous finance minister, and if you look at the IMF meetings over the last decade or so, you'll find that a lot of business people went with. This time around, so trade unionists also went with. And everybody's working to sell the country and to say, we can make it happen here, give us a bit more time. How does that guy feel? Does he feel the promise has been broken? I think so. She feels that maybe we haven't got that commitment from government anymore when we want to do a big project. And if you think some big business projects, if you go and you put a new gold mine down, you do not take any gold out of there for 7 years. You have to finance something for 7 years, pour in money into a hole in the ground. You have to have quite a lot of certainty to do that. Am I right? That the government is not going to confiscate your stuff, which is what happened in the Optimum mine, in a sense. That things are going to be quite sure. You want that. So the really big projects and so on, they're going to hang on for a while. There's going to be a lull. And the business guy isn't now going to come and open his second factory. He's going to take a wait-and-see attitude. And what does that do? Does that create jobs? No. But at the other end, it is also a thing like cost containment. So the accountants are going to be called in more regularly. And business is going to think, well, how do I carry on doing the same stuff? Do I just upgrade the machinery or the same as the homeowner? Or do I just make it work a little bit longer? Do I use my truck for another year or two? So again, the mechanic and that sort of guy scores, if you understand what I'm getting at. So ultimately, it is less growth. But if you look at the average of the forecast, not everybody changed theirs, but it dropped for next year from 1.75% to less than 1.5%. I suspect that we'll still see some others downgraded because some organizations are big and it takes a while. But everywhere the growth is going to be just a little bit slower. And interest rates don't go down. They might not go up, but there's a small chance for that. But ultimately, they're not going to go down as quickly as we hope for them to come down. And that means there's less money available to people to spend. So when that happens, people have to cut back somewhere for a longer time period. And the strange thing in South Africa is we see fast food sales are carrying on. There's no problem, all right? And then, yes, we all know music and DVDs have been overtaken and they're all gone, you know, but the clothing guys are struggling. But obviously, if you can survive, if Stadiford's closes, then Edgar's gets a bit more custom. So there are going to be business failures and business closes in this process. But not for everyone. So what do you do as a business? You have to make sure you survive. You have to make sure you contain costs, you look for new clients, you take the attitude that I will make it. I will beat my neighbor. It's going to be a much more competitive environment out there. That is the point that I'd like to make. And then all these things have already happened. I've spoken about it. But I just want to say, as a sort of second last thing, because I think it's also important to acknowledge something. We're different. We're different because we have a highly liquid market in both currencies, bonds, and shares. We are highly, highly liquid. We have a very sophisticated financial market. We have, it's no longer the 10th, it's now the 8th largest. I double-checked this weekend. We have the 8th largest pension fund in the pension fund assets in the world in US dollar terms. Can I put it in very, very crass things? We have over 16 million pension fund accounts in South Africa. We have more pension fund accounts than we have people working. If you add the friendly societies to it, we have more pension fund accounts and funeral policies than we have people on welfare. You bloody capitalists. You're all just capitalists. You just don't want to admit it. South Africa is the biggest capitalist nation on earth. Okay? I want you to argue with me, because it is. For such a small population, we've got a lot. We've got about 37 times the average assets of the average emerging market. Do you realize that? If you start realizing that, you're going to start loading your bullet and shoot all those commies, aren't you? For me. I'm going to dish out bullets just now. But ultimately, I think it's very important that we have that understanding, because what does that do in this area? Well, it says that I've got my own savings, and here is as a percentage of GDP, we're 5th highest. I just didn't include Iceland, because that makes it very important. We also are important players. Here, you can see the red line is the foreigners. They're about 36%, maybe even now 40% of our government debt market. But the rest is our institutions, our pension funds, our long-term insurers, even our short-term insurers. Because when you take car financing, that guy has to put that money to work. All right? And when you buy a funeral policy, the same. And even if you take a medical aid, all those things go into our financial markets. And that means that we have our own savings base. We obviously get hurt in the process of a downgrade, but when the interest rates go up and the price of those things, then that we hit the price problem. But the guys buying in new get the yield. And ultimately, we're taking a lot more of our own risks, because in a different way, we are about 2.2% of the world's pension fund assets. Do you realize that? We're a 0.5% or 0.4% or 0.7% of the world's population. So we have a large amount of pension funds, mutual funds, and all that. And that means the downgrade is probably not as bad for South Africa. It's not necessarily good. That's not what I'm saying. It's not good. Okay? But it's not as bad as it would be for a country like Brazil. Or if you downgrade a country like Tanzania that has hardly any financial markets. They have to rely on the World Bank and other foreign funders who have to convince people, and people that don't know your country, a lot more, and they get paid. They have to pay a lot more. So this is a huge thing that we have. This is a very, very big big thing. And, you know, I can go on to many things. The other thing is, our companies in the main, our longer term investments have gone into the other opposite direction. We've gone into other countries. So you'll find a lot of the shares, or the firms, sorry, of the JSE have a huge amount of foreign holdings. So we have the strange situation where foreigners buy our shares, but our companies own shares somewhere else. Let's take a company that you all know, British American Tobacco. It's listed here. It's not necessarily even a South African company. It doesn't probably sell even 5% of its product here. Same with Richmond. If you look at a Naspers, its value isn't here. Its value is somewhere in China called 10 cents. I keep offering them 20 cents for it, but they won't give it to me. But ultimately, that's a very big thing. But we are still reliant, and that's why it hurt us. We are still reliant on short-term funds because we don't save enough every time. If you look at our pension accounts, we contribute at this moment in time much less than we take out of them. So we're relying a lot more on that growth. If that growth slows down, we'll feel the pain more. I'm going to rush through the sectors, just not all of them, but you can see here the transport is a very good sector to have a look at what's happening now. And you can see there were the green shoots as it was just coming up. This was up to today's data, I think. So it's up to March. You can see the mining starting to pile up. I mean, the mining growth in the first quarter is 15% on the fourth quarter, seasonally adjusted and annualized. It's absolutely amazing. The end of the drought, especially in the northern part of the country, is certainly going to have a very positive impact on agricultural policy. Okay, there's nothing, you know, we can do we can create more certainty in the farming area, but here was a bit of rain, so that also helped. But obviously, the big problem is that the consumer is just so, at this moment in time, under stress. You can see that confidence. You can see how car sales are just falling back. You can see the consumer. You know, everybody talks about a debt crisis. Well, the consumer for about 40 months, that will be including April then, this is 39 months still or so, is just not been borrowing more than the rate of inflation. So households have been taking their debt away, if you wish, and here you can see it. This has been the longest recovery of households on record in South Africa. So when the consumer comes back, it could be very, very positive, but it's going to take a while for him to get back, or her to get back. Why is that? Because those interest rates stay higher for longer. Because those downgrades play on our psyche. You're not going to take that big risk with a big brand new car now, or much less people are going to do it, or the new house. So you'd rather than a new house, you'd now rather maybe build on a bit, or knock out a wall, and give Omar another, place to stay in the house, and then you'll maybe rent out her house, because you're going to close the son. If you look at that, however, yes, we're poorer than many of these countries, but debt to household income isn't a problem in South Africa at the moment. I mean, the irony of everything is Denmark has a national credit regulator like ours, yet they have 300% nearly debt to household income. So, every country is different, and yes, richer ones can have more, but I think we're not out of sync here. We're really not out of sync. We're probably a bit worse than the Poles, but probably a bit better off than the Greeks and those. So ultimately, I think that might be a blessing in the longer run that we don't have the interest rates come down now. So we, not quite now, but in 18 months or 2 years' time, the consumer will be a lot more recovered than we think. So sometimes dark clouds have a bit of a silver lining. And I'm not trying to talk everything up. It's not going to be easy in the next 2 years. There's no doubt about it. But the consumer was busy recovering. And I would have thought that if interest rates came down 6 months, 9 months later, the consumer would be sort of back. But right now, when junk status arrives, banks are also worried. And their cost of capital goes up. So they're not going to try and lend to everybody. They're going to be very, very selective. So that is the one thing I think that is, I see the ministers here, so I won't say too much on the budget, but you can see in my little picture here. Don't want to say much more. The partly good news, I don't know how this is going to hold, but we have, other than interest, our income is going to be the tax income is going to be slightly bigger than the rest of the spending. So that's called the primary sign. That is a good sign. But here's our actual problem, is that our debt has started increasing. And the last time we were in a non-investment grade or junk status, our debt was very much in the sort of similar level as it was. And the other thing that they've expressed concern about is the government guarantees. And we just saw in that budget how quickly someone like Eskom made use of those government guarantees. And that's one of the things that other people also pointed out who are looking at us, not the rating agencies, but the investment managers and the like. And they are worried about that. And I'd like to see what the June report from the Reserve Bank is going to tell us about this, and probably the September one. And I think that's another reason I think we're going to struggle to not be downgraded. You can see the thing that's growing the fastest. Previous finance ministers here, you can't say I'm lying, I'm using his graph, is that our debt service costs are growing quicker than anything else. And second of all, obviously our university education, if you wish, because that's what post-school is in most cases. So you can see that those things that grow less than 6% are below the rate of inflation. Below, say, 8%, just roughly speaking, you could say are going to become smaller as a percentage of GDP. So that says to you where our priorities lie with post-school education, health and social security, housing and municipal infrastructure, you could say is neutral, and all the rest are not that important. I call this the survival of the crooks, I don't expect comment. Will be slower growth. There's no forecast of growth in the next while, and I think it will get better, but in the next 4 years or so of more than 2.2%. The one factor that's definitely negative is the consumer, but he is recovering. Interest rates are unlikely to decline, and the government debt burden will increase. You can see here that unlike the world economy, South African economists have been downgrading their forecasts. I suspect that many of the other institutions will over time. This is the last one. We get the next one from the Reserve Bank. But this is an interesting picture in that that is where our population growth is, that black line. So when you want to know when people are under pressure is when your growth isn't quicker than your population growth. And people don't expect to stand still. They want to get richer quickly, actually. That's why schemes work so well when you tell people, if you give me R5 every month, we'll get you billions back in the end of the week, you know? And anyway, so you can see for a while we haven't been doing too well, and we're unlikely this year to beat the population growth. I think the Rand is going to be our saving grace in a different way, because the commodity cycle I'm still unsure about, and that makes us survive a little longer, so we want a bit of a weaker Rand. I think we will be downgraded again, even after the Moody's downgrade that's still outstanding. But here's some good news. First of all, just normal economist sort of good news is that inflation is not going to be that much of a problem, because we've had a weaker Rand before. The car prices you're paying now for are based on the previous weaker Rand. They don't bring car prices back down. So that is the one thing. I don't think there are any major interest rate hikes out there. So the primary sectors are doing much, much better. And I think that will have a positive impact on things like transport sector, exports, not so much, and therefore the current account. And as I said, the consumer is actually busy recovering. So when we do bounce back, the bounce back could be a lot stronger than we think. I think the other good news is the dark glasses we had have fallen off, thanks largely to that man over there, but many others as well. People are seeing something, and they're seeing that things aren't what they're supposed to be. And it may have the disadvantage of bringing down the confidence of people right now. But truth is not something that you can deny people too long. And it will come out sooner or later. And while this truth is coming out, and I think people see that the emperor is standing naked, and not just one emperor, but quite a few actually, it is looking as a positive to me. I think it's something that we can do. And then the other thing is, when you have a very strong government in terms of what they get in votes, that's not always necessarily a good thing. So it's good to have a stronger opposition, because then people keep each other in check. And that, I think, is making us more normal. So I don't think we should disregard this time period as just something bad. It's not nice being here. It's certainly, to put it mildly, cuck. But ultimately, it is something that we'd have to go through. It's part of the growing pains. I was at a speech on a guy talking about free speech, and the one thing I took away from that is he said, his name's Fleming Rose, he's the guy that had the Muhammad, the prophets drawn in Denmark, and now he has to walk around with a guard. You can't give any lecture in Europe without police and everything like that. And he says the one thing about free speech is it's painful in a diverse society, because everybody has very different ideas. And I think that is the one thing I think about, is when we're this diverse, we have a lot of things that we don't always think about and we feel very angry about. But if they're not spoken, that anger builds up somewhere else. And in this free speech environment, hopefully we can move forward. And I'm not just saying this is now a free speech environment. I'm just saying the same with the economy. If you just keep on plastering over the cracks, when they do spill, they're going to spill ugly. And that's what's happening in a way. It's not maybe quite as ugly as it could have been, but we are now in a process where the stuff looks a bit better, I think, in the longer term, albeit in the shorter term at the expense of growth, at the expense of per capita income for people, people's wealth. That's important. And that's my story. Thank you very, very much.